Hello and welcome. So today we have an interview with Claire Snowden-Darling. And first of all, I'm Zoisa, for those of you who don't remember. And Claire is here to talk about really women and hormonal changes, allergies and food sensitivity in particular. The reason that I asked, one of the reasons that I asked Claire to come and speak and do this interview was based on my own experiences. So for those of you that don't know, I'm 48, peri-menopause, and I've spent about a year going through every quarter, losing my voice, ear, nose, throat specialists going, no, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing there. And I'm like, I've had no voice for 8 weeks. I've got nasal drip. I only kind of discovered that from talking through other Pilates instructors, and they'd stick their stuff up my nose or down my throat and they go, well, there's a little bit of inflammation. And I'm like, this is happening too regularly. And then I discovered more about the peri-menopause. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Claire at a Jenny Burrell women's health, fitness, empowering, Women on Fire, there we go, that's the word, Women on Fire conference. And I was just like, I have to work with Claire. I know you've done loads to kind of help my mum and everything, so thank you very much for that. And yeah, there's lots of other people who I really feel need to know more and just be more educated so that they can make informed choices. And so I'm going to hand you over to Claire and she can tell you a little bit more about herself.
Hello, thank you, Zoe. So thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I just firstly want to, I just love this work that you're doing that you were telling me about a minute ago. And I'm so excited about how many of us now are really, singing about this kind of work from the rooftops, because I just think about, the generations of women that haven't had this kind of support. And actually we're still, it's massively lacking, I think, in the broader society, but like it's just great to feel so many of us all pulling together and just getting this information out there. So yeah, thank you. I actually got into doing what I do 15 years ago now, after I had my daughter and nearly died giving birth, and it was all very traumatic and whatnot, and left me with chronic depression. And I found that the offerings of the medical model were very lacking, particularly around the fatigue that I was experiencing. And so I kind of went out to start to try and find ways to fix myself. And kinesiology found me. Like, I just started to try and get myself a bit better. And actually I ended up with this sort of whole career change. But the reason why I have become so passionate about hormones is that I was diagnosed with early menopause 2 weeks before my 40th birthday, and having basically gone through 8 years of just relentless unwellness. I wasn't ill and I wasn't diseased, I was unwell and exhausted and weight gain, and the reason that the medical model was so lacking was nothing showed up. A bit like you with your tests, nothing shows up medically until it gets a certain place down the line.
Yeah.
And
past the point of no, oh yes, if you're just in their normal range, it's like, then everything's fine.
Exactly. You're fine, go away. And even by then I was quite a very busy kinesiologist and teaching kinesiology to some of the highest levels, but even in that there was so much missing, so much about the modern health conditions and the modern health phenomenons that we are seeing. A lot of the courses available really are, from 20 years ago when they were written. And, in the last 15, 20 years, everything has changed in our health profiles. So that's how I got more interested in hormones, and particularly going through the menopause journey myself and really having to figure it all out. So I've been in practice for 15 years. I work remotely. I work with people internationally. But actually, some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, and what I was talking about at Women on Fire, is I now look at the body with this overview of this hormone structure, which has never really been talked about before. All the segments of it have been talked about, but not actually taught as a specialized approach to helping people with a variety of health conditions. And actually we're in the process, that's just become an accredited practitioner training course, and we launch our college, my business partner and I launch our college in February. So our first practitioner course goes live then. So that's a combination of functional nutrition and kinesiology. So we call it functional kinesiology. So it's really exciting because these hormonal issues, the histamines, the digestion, it's all so part of it. So the same way that you're approaching things with this really proper, full, whole health, holistic perspective, that's what we're doing too, which is exciting.
Brilliant. No, that's wonderful. So thank you very much for that. And I think one of the things that particularly interested me, because when you're, as a woman, as a female, you go through a variety of different stages. Hormones is something that have an impact on our life. So you don't really think about anything of them, and then you reach your kind of puberty, and then they start rearing their head. And interestingly, I'd completely forgotten about puberty until my mum reminded me that actually I had really bad periods, and then there were times when it was just, I'd feel so nauseous and sick because you have those shifting hormone levels, and then things tick along, and then you might have some babies or not, and then you get to like 35, just after 35, and they start to change just very subtly, so subtle that if you're the type of person that is aware of just the slight differences, and you're like, it doesn't quite feel the same, but I can't quite put my finger on it. I think it's not until maybe I believe that started to happen to me, but it took me another, I would say, from 35 till maybe about 40, mid 40s, to kind of, and some drastic operations and C-sections and other things. And so major interventions in terms of operations to just really flip my system out of balance completely, to go, okay, I need to find out a little bit more. And so one of the things in terms of with your kinesiology and the hormone experience that you have is that I wanted to know, in terms of the challenges and the allergies and just an increased sensitivity, is it something that is age specific? And really, why does it happen? I'm peri-menopause, so I'm like, okay, for those ladies who are kind of in that phase, is it something that we don't really need to think about until we kind of hit that 35 plus? Or being that hormones are something that you have throughout your lifetime, is it in terms of, these imbalances and the way that the hormones relate to the other systems, that actually any age can be a factor? So that's
a really great question. It's quite broad, so I'm going to see if I can break it down a bit. I mean, in terms of the allergies and the increased sensitivities,
yes, that
does happen more, or some women experience it more as they hit perimenopause, sort of to post-menopause. However, I feel that the global trend that we're seeing is that allergies and increased sensitivities are happening throughout people's lives. I mean, when I first went into clinic, I wasn't seeing children younger than 17. It is common for me to be now seeing children of 4, 5 and 6 with sensitivities. And actually, why does it happen is the interesting one. And it happens because of estrogen dominance. And so this is why it's more common for women. So a classic one is like my mum said that she used to be able to eat sort of, anything really. And then suddenly she went into perimenopause and couldn't go near squid or oily fish. It would just literally send a bent over double, lying in bed for the rest of the afternoon, and had to completely avoid it. So suddenly that food, and then there were other things that she suddenly couldn't eat. Now that's actually sort of typically how it should have been for women, and as we hit estrogen dominance. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But actually that is happening now, younger and in both genders, because we are starting to experience estrogen overload from a variety of different places. So I'm aware that our focus for this conversation is menopause, but to give you a brief idea of that, because it does actually come into why we can experience it so badly in menopause, is because, you know, on the cells of our body, we have got a receptor on every cell for estrogen, which means every single cell is able to receive and hold on to estrogen. It's not the same for all hormones, but it is. Estrogen is one that is true for. And there are many things in our environment more now than there ever were that mimic estrogen, so what we call xenoestrogens. This is where all the hoo-ha over plastic bottles and the BPAs in plastics come from. It's the issue with some of the toxic chemicals in our toiletries or the cleaning products that we use, in off-gassing from furniture. In fact, actually, it's genuinely in all pesticides. It's in pollution. It's just kind of our whole worlds are overloaded with estrogen, and this is actually why, for example, when we start to see obesity in men, they also start to grow the man boobs. That's one of the reasons, is because the diabetes phenomenon is often actually an estrogen phenomenon. And what goes hand in hand, so here we have this estrogen dominance, body doesn't know what to do with it, can't clear it, and the xenoestrogens aren't like our estrogen. Estrogen is the most wonderful hormone, and I've only recently been saying that because I've been battling estrogen for the last few years, but when it's the natural hormone that our body wants to make, not the one that is overloaded in our systems because of the environment. So actually it's the estrogen dominance, and as soon as we have too much estrogen in the body, or estrogen itself, it elevates histamine. And as soon as histamine is elevated, our immune system is on high alert. So this is the issue that we suddenly have. And this is actually people who have sensitivities their whole life. I was getting to the point where I was allergic to, you know, life itself. And it was just, and that was from a teenager, just such elevated histamine levels that you just starts looking at anything as, I can't tolerate this, I can't cope with it. So yeah, it's not age specific anymore. But most women, if they've got away with it, if they haven't had things like irritable bowel syndrome, heavy periods, headaches, migraines, I mean, lucky them. But that it will often be peri to post-menopause, where they will start to notice this increased sensitivity issue.
Wow, thank you. That's fascinating. And I think definitely from the point of view in knowing that, yes, it's something to be aware of, and when you come into that perimenopause, but also just in the wider field in terms of if you have kids and, you know, they start to have food sensitivities. So thank you very much for that. And then one of the things that you briefly started to touch upon a moment ago was in terms of the imbalance, kind of some of the common symptoms that you see, if there are particular, I guess, triggers, habits, experiences, and also to let people know about how does food impact upon this. Particularly one of the things that I mentioned for me was the kind of like the runny nose, or just feeling that you have allergies, and for me, interestingly, what I've discovered is that it's kind of some of the pollens, so some of the fur that come at different times of year. So more in the winter, it was more like summer fir trees. But then it's like almost like each quarter, there's something in the environment that has a different impact that will kind of like set things in motion. But also things like, it's just like, oh, I just, you know, my skin feels really itchy, or you're just like, oh, I just feel a bit like, and it's like, not, you haven't necessarily changed the skin cream that you're using or whatever. It's again, it's like, well, what are those different things that have an impact on that histamine regulator? And as you said, the estrogen is a key thing. But what is it if people are not sure on the things that can kind of trigger, or some of the symptoms that they may be experiencing, or they might just put it down to, oh, it's just one of those days, it's just one of those things. Because for me, in terms of educating and and enlightening people is to be able to use the knowledge and the things that you found in your clinical experience that everyday kind of like normal Joe blogs, we kind of just put it on, oh, it's just me, oh, it's just one of those things. Whereas actually, if we can highlight and go, well, actually, if you're experiencing this or this or this or this or this, it's not common.
Yeah.
It is common occurrence, but actually it's what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, it may be a common occurrence, but it isn't something that's necessarily
it doesn't have
normal.
To be the norm. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
Exactly. Well, it's really interesting because there's a lot of things that women are going through life with and just thinking that they're the norm. So an example would be headaches, migraines, all of these things are just considered normal kind of conditions. Irritable bowel syndrome, definitely. I would definitely be concerned about elevated histamine with irritable bowel syndrome. So by irritable bowel syndrome, I don't mean you have to have the whole syndrome. We could be talking about someone who is a little bit on the constipated side or a little bit on the loose side, particularly if you're getting the cramping. I'd be saying your body is trying to reject something, like it's just not happy with something that you're eating. Within some of the defined symptoms of menopause, night sweats can actually be caused or made worse by elevated histamine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the itchy thing. I mean, a classic one is I remember waking up with my fingernails embedded into my scalp because it was itching so badly. Dizziness, that's a real histamine, that kind of dizzy, feeling nauseous, even the menofog, that kind of, and the lack of memory can be elevated histamine. So that doesn't mean that they're not symptoms of menopause. They are, and they can be controlled by reducing that histamine for sure. So have I just got more? Or eczema, that's a biggie, a real biggie, and sort of unexplained eczema. So especially not if it's eczema all over your skin, that's probably, you've always sort of been prone to a bit of eczema and it's there. I'm talking about really common that menopausal women will suddenly get you couldn't even diagnose it as eczema. It will be the patch of weirdest sort of sore, raised, dry skin, maybe under their breasts, in their sort of groin area. I've had women have it sort of like on their buttocks, on bits of their body that are going to be getting warm. And
I've had that as well. It's and I went through a stage, and it was just like it came up almost like blisters, and I was like, is this a herpesvirus thing? And it just seemed to come out of the blue, and it was just in one location. I was like, maybe it's the bra strap thing, maybe it's something I'm wearing. And I was just like, have I touched anything that's weird? And actually no cream wouldn't help it. And then I just happened to go, what if I take some antihistamine tablets? And actually I took that, and I just kept myself on it for more than 2 or 3 days, and I'm like, oh, it's starting to go down. And that was really freaky and weird. And the other thing that I've noticed as a massage, because I do massage as well, is with people that have that eczema or the skin, because eczema is just a skin irritation. It's like the skin is trying to, push something out and go, look, I need some help. This isn't supposed to be in here. Was that actually if there were areas where muscularly the body was overworking or they'd done a lot, then actually where there was excess tension, like physically in the body, would be the area that it was showing up. So if they'd done loads with the upper back, it might be kind of like across the bra strap or down along kind of one side of the spine. So yeah, if there was an area that would overwork, so there was extra toxicity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely be looking at histamine for those things. So when it comes to what else was there? Sleep. So actually some of the really bad menopausal insomnia, yes, is of course down to the fact, predominantly that we haven't got enough progesterone and we're not making as much melatonin anymore. Yes, that's the scientific reason, but actually elevated histamine will massively contribute to that. Because if you think about it, histamine is your body being on high alert. It's literally like, something is attacking me and I don't know what it is, so I'm going to pretend that everything's attacking me. So we can't go to sleep with one eye open, hoping we're not going to get, attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. Like, that's actually what our body's trying to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, histamine is big for that. So food's a really interesting one because actually, yes, there are foods that will support you to reduce your histamine, and they're surprising, because actually, in terms of whether or not they're acid or alkali, elevated histamine isn't necessarily one of the places I would think of the alkaline diet being one. As a nutritionist, when people say to me, what's a healthy diet, my answer is always, what is it you're looking to achieve? And for how long? So sometimes, things can ebb and change, and that's cool and groovy. So elevated histamine isn't one of those that I would think of as naturally requiring an alkaline diet, for example. I would be going and researching that there are high histamine foods, and those high histamine foods will absolutely be causing you no end of grief. So they're interesting as well, because they sort of often fly against the face of nutritional advice. So alcohol is kind of a standard one. Chocolate and other cocoa-based products, very, very common. And any mature cheese, but actually, I remember I had a really bad histamine response in the summer. And I mean, just even the smell of a bit of feta, a bit of organic feta, which, is a little bit of a naughty thing on my steamed veg every now and again. Like, even the smell of it was making me nauseous. Any of the processed meats, so salami, ham, sausages, anything like that. Shellfish, this is where the fish is common for women in peri-menopause.
Yeah.
But this is where it gets interesting, because nuts will elevate histamine because the oils on them. Chickpeas, any of the beans and pulses are going to elevate histamine. And most surprisingly, actually any of the fermented foods. So all of the things we tell people to eat to get a really healthy microbiome, sauerkraut, kombuchas, miso, kefir, any of those, no, not when you're having an elevated histamine attack. We need to clean out the microbiome. So the reason I've been doing actually recently some really big research into this, because I believe that if you are having a response, so I would be saying that if you're taking an antihistamine and it's not clearing it, so yours was definitely a histamine that your body still knew how to control, it wasn't gone cray-cray yet. Yeah. That it gets to the point with histamine where it does go absolutely crazy, and eczema in all sorts of weird places popping up. And then the thing with, I remember having eczema as a kid, and I had the eczema that sort of lived there, and it didn't move, it just did it just stayed there and was itchy. This eczema I can't even call it eczema, because it's not. This skin response it's quite common. I see it with people under their eyes, and it's sore and it's red and it's angry. So if anybody's getting anything like that, and antihistamines aren't touching it, and I'll be honest, I do in clinic, when I get women having these responses, I do say, if you're not intolerant to them, go take an over-the-counter antihistamine and see what happens, because if it gets better, we know we're dealing with a histamine response that the body still has the capability to clear. Yeah. That's the grail. That's when I'm really looking at these high histamine foods, clearing them out of the diet, doing a nice microbiome reset. All of those things are going to help with reducing histamine.
Yeah.
However, things like, I even tried steroid cream on the funny skin stuff, because I was like going on holiday and desperate, and I was like, that's not nice on my thighs. Didn't touch it. Like, this is where something's in Denmark. This is not just a topical skin issue. There is a reaction in my body. And actually, this is now, I would be looking at things like breath tests for small intestine bacterial overgrowth, because somehow you're producing way more estrogen. Because I've everything I was experiencing so badly in the summer, everything in my life is organic, and I'm like, come on, why have I got this elevated estrogen? This is ridiculous. And actually, it was small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And what's interesting is SIBO is now rife, and it's vile, and it's rife because of people even up until sort of a decade ago eating a high wheat diet, high dairy diet, the use of antibiotics at any points in the last 20 years, the use of pharmaceutical medication or recreational drugs in the last 20 years, high levels of stress and cortisol, any kind of elevated carbohydrate or refined carbohydrate diet. We are just creating a microbiome where SIBO will thrive. And one of the first things that I look at with SIBO is this elevated histamine. Okay. So not wanting to sort of scare anyone, but I would be saying, right, definitely if you're experiencing it, try the antihistamine. If that works, definitely be doing a period of clearing out those high histamine foods, lovely gut resetting. And if it's not shifting it, that's when you go, okay, good. Now I know it's not that all is lost. There is another port of call here.
Yeah. I guess it's just sifting through. It's just like, okay, first response, second response, let's kind of go here.
Exactly.
And I think the thing that's really interesting is it's the skin reaction. And I think that's a really good terminology to use, because it is a skin reaction. It doesn't, when I've spoken to a couple of my ladies that I teach Pilates to, and they've had skin reaction, and interestingly, one of them was kind of speaking with her doctor, and they're just like, it's nothing, or no, it's got nothing related to the hormones whatsoever. No, let's put you on some steroid creams. And interestingly, the steroid cream with both of the people that I know work with them, assisted in the short term, but actually when it came to coming off the steroids, it's almost like everything it was exacerbated. And so even I'm going to pause for a moment. Am I still coming? Yeah. The screen just froze for a moment. So even though the steroids helped initially, it was almost like everything just went twice as crazy afterwards. And then one of them has been, they've said, oh, it's something to do with a copper allergy, which I find really interesting. Just from a point of view that I'm like, that's all very well, but it's just like, what is it? Is it about the copper and I'm sure there's a hormonal thing in there, because it's so sensitive.
Yeah, we should be able to buffer that, right? Like,
yeah,
something else going on here.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the other thing, as well as the estrogen that you mentioned briefly, was with regards to the stress hormone. So my other kind of element or question is that kind of cortisol stress in relation to histamine. And I don't know if something that you've come across in clinic. I have the experience from whether I'm massaging or teaching Pilates, or one of the courses that I've run on midlife women and their hormone changes, is that people's idea or perception of stress is, if I'm running around like a headless chicken and I'm not managing to cope with things, then I'm stressed. But actually, if I feel that I'm managing and actually I don't run around a lot, then actually I'm not stressed. And so my challenge is, you may not feel stressed, but if your nervous system, and this is for me where I do my best to come back to, especially with all the training that I've done with the MELT method and all I've learned with the nervous system and how it's linked to the gut, is that if your nervous system is on high alert and is stressed, you may not recognize the signals, but actually, like you say, it's like everything's on that adrenal overload.
Absolutely. I always say to people that unless you're living in a cave on the side of a hill, living in 2019 is pretty stressful, and will only get worse in 2020, I imagine, because we're just exposed to our bodies are. We used to teach it like this in kinesiology, that we're little froggies boiling to death. That if you were to take a frog and put it in boiling water, it'll jump straight out again. But we have literally been put in this nice warm water, and then it's just heated up and heated up and heated up until we boil to death. That's what's happened with our stress. We don't even know that we're stressed. So when you're sort of saying it in that way, people are thinking about it's stress as in the mental, emotional stress of work pressure, financial pressure, relationship pressure, children pressure, blah, 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 and or the physical stress of rushing around and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But what people aren't taking into account there is the electrical stress that we are under because of Wi-Fi's and lighting and heating and phones and goodness knows what else that we are subjected to every single day. Our nervous systems are fried with that stuff, like fried. But then also the biochemical stress that we're under. So again, going back to pesticides, the fact that our soils are minerally depleted. So our bodies are under stress because they're digesting something and A, getting a load of toxic chemicals, and then B, not getting the nutrition that they're looking for. Then you start adding in that so the biochemical depletion there. Then you start looking at foods that we're actually intolerant to. So particularly, mass-produced wheat, the farmed dairy, the mass-farmed dairy that people are consuming, the refined carbohydrates, all of these, just eating something we're intolerant to will pile the body with cortisol, like massively. And so we become adrenaline junkies. That's why we crave some of this food. It's this adrenaline hit. So our bodies are under massive amounts of stress, and these wars are being waged. We just can't see them. So when people go, I thrive on stress, I go, yeah, that's because you've been under so much of it, you've forgotten what it's like to not have any.
Yeah. And so that extra stress actually has an impact again on both estrogen and the histamine levels.
Yeah, there's a massive connection with cortisol and estrogen. So actually what happens is it's not even the cortisol and the estrogen. It's to do with cortisol and progesterone. So it's called the pregnenolone steal. And I'm sure, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, and I'm sure your ladies who have read your stuff do, but just to remind everyone. So cholesterol makes a hormone called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone produces progesterone, and the story should end here. But as soon as we apply any stress at all, be that a food we're intolerant to or children pressure or whatever, the body goes, actually, it's not important for me to give you a nice calming hormone that's going to help hold a baby. I need to get you out of this, crazy pack of saber-toothed tigers. So I'm going to turn that progesterone into cortisol. So actually what happens is not so much that the cortisol creates estrogen, the cortisol reduces our progesterone, so we have too much estrogen. So that's actually how that happens. And yeah, absolutely, as soon as there's too much cortisol as well, there's a massive impact with cortisol is supposed to be an anti-inflammatory, but when we've got too much of it, it becomes an inflammatory and it overstimulates our mast cells, which means we're overproducing histamine. So it's this beautiful storm of hormones that's going on inside of us.
But then there is the good side. So I know we've spent a lot of time just talking about, yes, it is something that occurs and there are different signs and symptoms, but actually, I think the good news is because there's so much more information, it's like you can make a change. And whether it's addressing, well, not whether, so it's like foods or taking the antihistamine and just going, okay, do those tablets work? That's something that anybody can do from going to their local supermarket. In terms of additional things that people can do to assist and help them, I would say, would be another kind of port of call. So in terms of guidance, what else would you say in terms of go-tos that people can do?
So first of all, we must be getting the cortisol down in our system. So I always look at the basics, make sure, really rein in your sleep hygiene. And I know that's so easy to say, but I know I've had to exert such self-discipline over the last year to kind of go, no, Claire, it's 10 o'clock, switch off from work. Don't be looking at a screen. Actually go old school. Come on, you can do it. So really getting your sleep hygiene back, because, enough sleep will help. And particularly if your sleep is a little bit sketchy anyway because of the menopausal symptoms. Eating, making decent food choices. Like this is a time where we really have to, because our body just won't let us not, actually. And even if it's down to, we all want to live. So define the things that work for you. So my histamine got so bad over the summer, but I was in my case, it was SIBO, by the way, and I've now fixed it. So hooray, like the world feels better. But like it got to the point where I was like, actually, I've got this event and I really do want to be able to drink an alcoholic beverage. But again, anything fermented, it just even smells awful. I don't want anything that's got any sugar in it. So no, not even a tonic water for a gin. So it was like vodka and soda water. Okay, so educate yourself to go, what isn't fermented, what is distilled with the soda water, doesn't mean you don't have to live your life. We can still use really gorgeous natural skincare products and makeup. Just doesn't even have to be an expensive brand. Just find one that's got without the big nasties in there. I actually wrote a blog, I think it's on our website, about the big 6 to avoid, and as long as you're avoiding those, you're doing yourself a pretty good favor. And as boring as it sounds for a lot of people, I'm a massive believer in some mindfulness. So even if it's 5 to 10 minutes a day, if that's all you can do, just sit in that silence, trying to park everything, or use something like the Headspace app, because like he has nailed it in terms of making it accessible. Like, doesn't matter how we do it, but deep breathing stimulates the vagus nerve. It stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. It's like a total hack to reducing cortisol in the system instantly. So those are some basics, and exercising, moving our body. But if you're really stressed and you're very high histamine, go with the gentle stuff, go with the yoga, go with the swimming, go with the low impact things.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's brilliant. And I think for me, one of the things that I know some of my clients have found helpful is the melt method. So it's still, although it's quite old here in the UK, old in terms of it's been here for over 10 years, it's still new in terms of many people don't really know about it. And it is a self-care technique using some little balls. And I talk about it, and actually we do it in our sessions. And what's fantastic about that is everybody, once they've finished either a foot treatment or hand treatment or a whole hour class that I've done, they're just like, oh, we could just go to sleep now. It's like makes everything go. And so for me, that's something that I've made sure that I've put into my routine for, I think since June, I've been consistent, like every day. And what I found that's fantastic is that it has had an impact on kind of like my bowel movements when I do hydrate myself enough. So I know that that's a kind of like a to-do on my to-do list, drink more water. But also little things in terms of my immune system or my body's ability to be able to cope, or my awareness of, I've kind of started to speed up again. You don't know that you've speeded up or those levels have increased until you do something to kind of make yourself more aware of, different. This is calmer. This is quieter. And so, that's really encouraging and important. I will make available. So one of the things that you spoke about was the 6 kind of major things to be aware of. So in terms of that blog, just to let people know that I will get that information from you, so that we can have a link to that so that people can be aware of that. Are there any other articles or things that you've written that would be a good first port of call for people who are thinking, I think this might be something that I need to look at, that they can kind of read a little bit more of, and then if they read that and go, definitely, I need somebody who's been through it, is speaking my language, because that I feel is often the challenge, is that you can go to the doctors or the people that are supposed to know and it's like you're hitting your head against a brick wall, or just speaking a different language, even though it's still English. What have you got, and how can people get in contact?
It's a great question. I was just trying to rack my brains with my menopause fog, trying to remember what I've written over the years. But there's what I've got is on our website, we actually have like loads of different blogs, and they'll all be segmented. So I guess a link to that. And then on Facebook, so I'm under Mostly, predominantly, my business page is Balanced Wellness UK, and there's loads of information on there. Stuff like how our hormones will change our structure, how our hormones changes, even down to like, the foods that we want to eat. So once we've changed our hormones, the foods that we want to eat changes, like it, because they govern everything, right? So yeah, there's loads of stuff on there. So we're pretty vibey on Facebook and also the blog on the website.
Brilliant. So I will do a link to those. And then you mentioned right at the beginning that you do work. Oh, I didn't mention. So Claire is actually based in West Sussex. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Around that area. So I'm like way west, over in Somerset. But you can work remotely. Is that correct?
Yeah, so with the kinesiology, we use muscle testing, but we don't actually need people present. I use hair samples. So that's worked really well.
Yeah.
And then we do Skype calls afterwards to go through the results and all the findings.
Yeah. Brilliant. So that's fantastic. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you very much. I've learned even more, which is amazing in terms of the hormones and the looking at the bigger picture and the subtlety in terms of how they work. And particularly, I think my takeaways are one of the phrases that you mentioned was the biological stress. That's something that I feel and I sense that, again, more people need to be aware and know of that, because we don't necessarily think about all the processes cellularly. And we have billions and billions of cells, and they all need to have a happy environment to be able to help us enjoy and live as we want to. And if the biology and how they integrate in that environment is just slightly off, it's like we have bad moods, so cellularly they can have a bit of a moment too.
Absolutely. And just I know we're wrapping up, but just to give an example of that, when I first started training in kinesiology, like I'd been obsessed with tomatoes my whole life, like obsessed, and they are a healthy food, right?
Yeah.
At that point, I was 32. I was overweight. I had IBS that would send me home from my day job because I couldn't sit. I was in agony, in tears of agony. I'd been on prescription medication for migraines for over 15 years. And in that first weekend in kinesiology, we tested for foods that you love the most. And I turned out to be intolerant for tomatoes. I mean, I was devastated. But within 3 weeks, I'd lost a stone. I've not had a migraine since, and that was 15 years ago. Yeah. It's unreal. And the amount of inflammation going off in my body, because there wasn't a day that went past where I didn't have a tomato in some form or another.
Yeah.
It's unreal when you find out a food that you're intolerant to, and you stop having it. It is unreal. Yeah.
And I think the other thing, my other takeaway is that I really encourage people to, in terms of the courses and how I work, is my job is to inform you and educate you. And it's just like when I've given you that information, either about how your body's working physically, or you've learned something about your nervous system, it's like, I've just given you the information. Your job is to then use that information and go, okay, well, what do I need this morning? Or is it this afternoon? Or is to just have that conversation and internal check-in. And things will shift and change. It's like, that's called life and being human. And I really love that you reiterated that. And what I love even more than that, because I know that for me, in terms of nutrition and food, it's always been, steer away from these ones and then know these ones. And I've just, my sense is in terms of diet, when I did my teaching in secondary schools, I had to cover kind of PE and dance and fitness and nutrition. And so for me, diet is, do I eat thoughtfully? That's all it should stand for. And do I eat thoughtfully for me is different as it is for you. And it's like, well, how much can my body tolerate that? Well, it depends on what else is going on, where my histamine levels or how much extra stress there is. And I love that you were like, so, I'd like to have a drink. So I just have to then go, well, if I'm going to do it, then what can I do it in a way that's going to help me? And then if I'm going to do it and go, do you know what? I just want to have that glass of wine. It's just, okay, then I know there's going to be a reaction. So what can I do the following day to kind of help me overcome it, rather than go, no, you can't have it. Don't do it.
Because the reality is, the more that we're self-critical, the more that we beat ourselves up about, feel guilty, then we're piling more cortisol into our system. So we're actually making the problem worse. So the thoughtfulness, of course, sometimes we make the decision to eat or drink something that isn't, perfectly healthy. Thank goodness, because who wants to be perfect? But then it's, okay, well, now either I know there's going to be fallout from this, but I'm expecting it, and there's no mystery, or I can actually choose something that isn't going to cause that fallout and still have fun.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. No, so I think those for me are massive takeaways, and to know that, what, it's okay. I can do it. I just
this is a journey. It's a journey.
And it will change. So so thank you very much for everything that you've shared, and everything that we've learned in this podcast, and not podcast, but it could be a podcast. And what I will do is, in the below here, when I edit the video, then you'll have Claire's details and how to contact her, and also the website details as well.
Wonderful.
So
thank you.
It's thank you ever so much.
You're welcome. It was fun. I enjoyed it.